Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the talk on the Red Book. As you can see, it's very red. First of all, in this initial presentation, I want to introduce the Red Book and define my approach. I don't know how many of you have read it, looked at it, the wonderful pictures, or if this is the first meeting with it. So let's have a brief introduction. The Red Book is a record Carl Gustav Jung's journey to the deepest part of the unconscious. He started it in 1913, worked on it intensively until 1918, and continued it regularly until about 1930. He was supported in his creative work by a very wonderful woman called Tony Wolff. She was his colleague, his friend, his lover, and helped Jung make sense of some of the experiences in the Red Book. I think you can see her mediumistic quality in the photograph. Jung's colleague, Richard Wilhelm, the translator of the I Ching, or Book of Changes, the Chinese oracular book, sent a text to Jung called The Secret of the Golden Flower. It was an old Chinese manuscript on alchemy, and Wilhelm wanted Jung's opinion. When Jung read it, he realized that his personal myth was alchemy. Not only that, he realized that his experiences written into the Red Book were actually alchemical. That is, he had the experiences before he knew the name. So after that experience, Jung did not write in the Red Book anymore. He said of his years with the Red Book, where he recorded his experiences. And I might add that this is not a thought reflection on his part. It's not a paradigm. It's an actual experience. And this is what he wrote. The years of which I have spoken to you, when I pursued the inner images, were the most important of my life. Everything else is to be derived from this. It began at that time, and the later details hardly matter at all. My entire life consisted in elaborating what had burst forth from the unconscious and flooded me like an enigmatic stream and threatened to break me. That was the stuff and material for more than one life, but the numinous beginning, which contained everything, was then. So all the works that Jung studied and wrote after this were because of this experience. So these words, actually written in 1957, now form the first page before the preface of all editions of the Red Book. It was finally published almost a century later in 2009. And many of the pictures, not a lot, some, were actually produced throughout this period. You find some of them in Jung's autobiography, Memories, Dreams, Reflections. So then, the Red Book is a written and painted record of Jung's personal experience of the objective psyche, or as it is sometimes called, the collective unconscious. It has other names. The well-known Jungian analyst and colleague of Jung, Barbara Hanna, simply called it the beyond. From the theosophical point of view, we would call it the Akashic record. That is a repository of everything ever done, ever felt, and more. So Jung's work is not in the humanistic psychology department. And I place a stress on this because humanistic psychology works on the development of the historical personality, how we're actually incarnated in this life. But Jung's psychology works at a deeper level on the soul level. And I would say that the image-making faculty of the psyche is the real imagination. That is, we don't do it. The psyche does it. And we pick up the images with our intuition and we use our will to execute them. But there's no way that our historical personality is creative. It comes from a deeper part. So we can find examples of this personal and collective unconscious or Akashic record in dreams. So if in a dream we meet a person that we know, perhaps the person reflects back to us a shadowy or unknown aspect of our personality. And the shadow also, besides hiding our mean things, nasty things, it hides our gifts. So it's a very unplumbed depth. There is then the possibility of integrating these unknown aspects into consciousness. So we have more energy in our personal consciousness. And we also have a personal understanding of ourselves and a broadening again of personal consciousness. These then are dreams that we would say were on the subjective level, where our historical personality can develop. But if in a dream we meet an image or personage who we have never met in ordinary life, without associations to anything we know, perhaps Christ or Buddha or Muhammad or an old Chinese sage from another era, there we're touching on the impersonal side of the unconscious. And that could be called the Akashic record. So these dreams from the beyond then are what we call objective. And I'd also like to qualify the word objective. It has nothing at all to do with rationality. It's a rather cold word. But it simply means that it's experienced without a paradigm, simply that it is experienced. So it can enter any faculty, the intuition, the feeling, the thinking, the practical aspect. So all these aspects can become conscious. So with entering into all our faculties and also into our personal, historical personality and going deeper into our soul, then we can have this integration of all these different levels. And that, to my mind, is the practice of the human being in this life. Now, we heard in the initial statement of Jung that everything that he ever did came from his numinous beginnings. So what would that be? Well, numinous comes from the word numen, meaning the spirit of divine power. So this means that the spirit of divine power looks after a place. It looks after this place we call the psyche. It also releases specific knowledge at certain times. So not everything can be accessed. So the Red Book then is a pointer to new times, leaving behind the cultivation of the extremely rational. And that rationale has been with us since the 17th century in the Age of Reason, where most of the things that we've experienced have been seen through a rational paradigm. And we even hear it in ordinary speech. Oh, we can't do that. It's not rational. But of course, many of us are not rational. And I'm sure that many here know that other dimension. So then Jung searches for the truth beyond the personal and confronts what the Numen, the spirit of the unconscious, the beyond, actually wants from him. So let's hear Jung's words as he struggles between the two spirits, the spirit of the times, this time, and the spirit of the depths. He says, I have learned that in addition to the spirit of this time, there is still another spirit at work, namely that which rules the depths of everything contemporary. The spirit of this time would like to hear of use and value. I also thought this way, and my humanity still thinks that way. But that other spirit forces me nevertheless to speak beyond justification, use and meaning, filled with human pride and blinded by the presumptions of the spirit of the times. I long sought to hold that other spirit away from me, but I did not consider that the spirit of the depths, from time immemorial, and for all the future, possesses a greater power than the spirit of this time, who changes with the generations. Of this great spirit of the depths, Jung says, the spirit of the depths has subjugated all pride and arrogance to the power of judgment. He took away my belief in science. He robbed me of the joy of explaining things. And he let devotion to the ideals of this time die out in me. He forced me down to the last and simplest things. So Jung has an awful lot snatched away from him by the spirit of the depths. And how difficult for a successful, ambitious man in the spirit of this time to not defy that spirit and hold to the values which seem to bring him success, though it does look as though they wouldn't work anyway. Then Jung says that the supreme meaning is the path and the bridge to what is to come. That is, the spirit of the dead goes to bring to the future and what is to come, which the spirit of this time cannot do. It's the eternal, the deeper spiritual reality that flows beneath all epochs and links them all together, but underneath in a mysterious way. So the spirit of this time is a temporary affair. It dies out. But what is the precise quality that Jung refers to when he speaks of this time? What was the zeitgeist that Jung was alert to? Around 1930, when Jung ceased to work on the Red Book, he had already discovered, through his experience, the overriding value of the soul. In 1933, he published Modern Man in Search of a Soul, where he gives predominance to a meaningful relationship between the spirit of the depths and the soul. When Jung described the spirit of this time as being concerned with use and value, he is evidently speaking of the spirit of materialism. And I say spirit of materialism. And one of its manifestations, of course, is the consumer society. About consuming things that you can touch and see, things that are visible, on sale, can be bought. Once consumed, they are replaced by newer things. The treadmill begins. When the things become old and can't be replaced easily, is money short? The compulsion remains of the spirit of the depths. And then what happens? Of course, we have debt, the credit card, and these things continue to build the spirit of this time. Then who controls your life? The bank, the credit card company? And then you have to ask questions. are you risking your soul? Is there a part of you which is enslaved? And then the big question, what recedes when the visible that you can touch is in front? Well, the invisible has to recede. Could that be the soul, the spiritual life? So the attitude of materialism points the soul of the human being more strongly in the direction of material or matter. It's magnetized by the spirit of the age, more steeply into matter, I must say, than at any other time in history. So this holds the clue to the spiritual purpose of Jung, the relationship of the opposites. By joining spirit and matter together to create an inner spiritual marriage, we have what Jung called alchemy, which is the joining together of the opposites into a spiritual marriage within, of course. So Jung then researched this problem through studies of the old alchemists and their problem of imbuing matter with spirit. In this way, the spirit of materialism could transform and find a spiritual purpose. That is, if the spirit of the times was not too resistant, because of course there are no haphazard things that happen with history. They all happen for a purpose. And now we have the greatest possible challenge ever to bring spirit into matter so that we are not dominated by the spirit of this time. And as we're born in this time, we have somehow to find a relationship to it. Another example, of course, is of the materialistic approach is the attitude to mental health. If you knew that your soul needed help, would you go and ask for help? Or would you say that you had a mental health problem? And what would be the reply if you said you needed help for yourself? Would some mental health expert say, "Oh, we just do mental health. The soul's a private matter"? So I've heard that happen. So you can see we live in this divided world. So Jung saw the possibility of bringing us into an indissoluble whole, whereby we could relate to the actual society that we lived in, but differently and spiritually. So you could say that the spirit of materialism challenges our personal incarnation in this age. Jung did not neglect to look at that, and nor did he seek a shelter from it. So what then could be our psycho-spiritual development? It will be to find that relationship. So it's no accident that we're asked to develop our historical personality, for it needs strengthening against the power of the spirit of this time. Jung says this about his own life. My life often seemed to me like a story that has no beginning and no end, creating the feeling that I was a historical fragment, an excerpt from which the preceding and succeeding texts were missing. I could well have imagined that I had lived in former centuries, and there encountered questions I was not able to answer, that I had been born again because I had not fulfilled the task given to me. So we all have our historical fragment to deal with between the time between birth and death. The poet Rainer Maria Rilke, born in the same year as young, 1875, comes into the same spirit of this time and has obviously picked up the atmosphere of the age of materialism, which intensifies as the 20th century unfolds. In his book, Letters to a Young Poet, written between 1902 and 1908, Rilke describes what happens if the spirit of the dead is neglected. And only the time spirit, the part of our nature that fuels our historical fragment, is accepted. And I quote, "That is at bottom the only courage that is demanded of us, to have the courage for the most strange, the most singular, and the most inexplicable that we may encounter. That mankind has in this sense been cowardly, has done endless harm. The experiences that are called visions, the whole so-called spirit world, death, all these things that are so closely akin to us, have by daily carrying been so crowded out of life that the senses with which we could have grasped them are atrophied, to say nothing of God." So visions of the spirit world become pathologies. Death is a morbid subject, rather than the beginning of a wondrous journey. I speak, of course, of the collective attitude of consciousness, not of the exceptions, but this does govern our way of being. In this collective world, hearing voices is synonymous with schizophrenia, not the voice of a great spirit. The advances of materialism have affected, as Rilke says, the senses with which we could have grasped these things, and are atrophied. The spiritual muscle that could have been strengthened has become slack. Materialism has taken that muscle and the energy that goes with it. Both Rilke, the poet of sensibilities, and Jung, the visionary psychologist, intuit the spirit of their shared epoch. The flooding of your psyche by the dreams and visions that he has written about in the Red Book are therefore strictly not a personal thing. Jung had an empirical attitude to reality and could not rest on speculation, nor general paradigms of reality. He needed the experience. As he says, "Before I could pull myself together to really do it, I needed a visible sign that the spirit of the depths in me was at the same time the ruler of the depths of world affairs." It happened in October of the year 1913, as I was leaving alone for a journey, that during the day I was suddenly overcome in broad daylight by a vision. I saw a terrible flood that covered all the northern and low-lying lands between the North Sea and the Alps. It reached beyond England and Russia, and from the coast of the North Sea right up to the Alps. I saw yellow waves, swimming rubble, and the death of countless thousands. This vision lasted 2 hours. It confused me and made me ill. I was not able to interpret it. 2 weeks passed. Then the vision recurred again, still more violent than ever before, and an inner voice spoke. "Look at it. It is completely real, and it will come to pass. You cannot doubt this. I wrestled again for 2 hours with this vision, but it held me fast. It left me exhausted and confused, and I thought my mind had gone crazy. From then on, the anxiety toward the terrible event that stood directly before us kept coming back. Once I saw a sea of blood over the northern lands. In the year 1914, in the month of June, at the beginning and end of the month, and at the beginning of July, I had the same dream 3 times. The third dream, at the beginning of July, went as follows. I was in a remote English land. It was necessary that I return to my homeland with a fast ship as speedily as possible. I reached home quickly. In my homeland, I found that in the middle of summer, a terrible cold had fallen from space, which had turned every living thing into ice. There stood a leaf-bearing but fruitless tree, whose leaves had turned into sweet grapes, full of healing juice, through the working of the frost. I picked some grapes and gave them to a great waiting throng. The first part of this dream, about Jung returning home quickly, did happen. The dream was in the beginning of July, and after repetitions of the dream, Jung feels a mounting tension. When the Great War broke out on 28th of July, 1914, he says, "At the time when the Great War broke out between the peoples of Europe, I found myself in Scotland, compelled by the war to choose the fastest ship and the shortest route home. I encountered the colossal cold that froze everything. I met with the flood, the sea of blood, and found my barren tree, whose leaves the frost had transformed into a remedy. And I had plucked the ripe fruit and gave it to you, and I do not know what I poured out for you, what bitter, intoxicating drink, which left on our tongues an aftertaste of blood." So in the dream, all living things turn to ice. There is a terrible cold in the middle of summer. The cold horror of the Great War descends from space as a fate falling on himself and humanity. The frozen grapes with the healing juice are actually made in reality by leaving grapes to freeze on the vine. They are pressed, the ice removed, leading to a highly concentrated and very delectable sweet wine. When Jung gives the grapes to a waiting throng, this action describes Jung's contribution to the collective culture of our time. By then, he grows anxious about that demand, a conflict that forces him to formulate the meaning of the spirit of the depths and what this means to all peoples. In other words, the remedy comes from the sweet wine of the frozen grapes, from nature herself, and Jung is the intermediary. Even though he gives the sweet wine to the people waiting, he is aware that they must not follow him. They must not in any way follow him. He says at this time, "Believe me, my friends, it is no teaching and no instruction that I give you. On what basis should I presume to teach you? I give you news of this man, but not of your own way. My path is not your path. Therefore, I cannot teach you. The way is within us, not in gods, not in teachings, not in laws. Within us is the way, the truth, and the life. So here we see the experienced aspect of Jung. He's not creating a paradigm. He's saying, find your path. He makes no presumption that what has worked for him is useful for anyone else. It is of no use to turn to gods of any kind to look for teachings that are outside oneself. The answer within ourselves, even though a great war is raging, still the answer is within. Within is the way, the truth, and the life, a direct and mystical statement of the inner path of the Christ, who Jung identifies with the great inner self, or the Christ living within. There is no generalized imitation. In this respect, some of you will remember the story of Krishna and the cowgirls. He dances with them all at the same time. Each one has a Krishna. Each of us has a Christ. He says, the signposts have fallen. Unblazed trails lie before us. And then he says, do not be greedy to gobble up the fruits of foreign fields. Do you not know that there is a fertile acre which bears everything that you need within yourself? Jung continues then with the spirit of the depths. He says, who knows the way to the eternally fruitful climes of the soul? You seek the way through mere appearances. You study books and give ear to all kinds of opinion. What good is that? There is only one way, and that is your way. You seek the path. I warn you away from my own. It can also be the wrong way for you. And some of you may no doubt remember the famous saying of Jung, who said, thank God I'm not a Jungian. So we see here that the spirit of the death speaks of the climate of the soul, its movements, tempers, gentleness. They can't be rationalized. The soul is not even tempered, but we must follow it. And then he says that he's not a lawgiver. He's not a savior. He's not a master teacher. And then he says, giving laws, bettering, making things easier, has all become wrong and evil. Let each one seek his own way. Then at the end of the passage, there is some mysterious words about the spirit of this time and the spirit of the depths. And Jung says, the one eye of the Godhead is blind. The one ear of the Godhead is deaf. The order of its being is crossed by chaos. So be patient with the crippledness of this world and do not overvalue its consummate beauty. What does this mean? The one eye of the Godhead is blind and one ear deaf. Of course, the Godhead is not God. It is an essence or substance of God. So the Godhead, as we apprehend it at the moment, is half seeing and half hearing. It's incomplete half evolved, half formed. The image of God can be seen, the image of God, not God, can be seen as a fully formed figure. But what if there is, it's only half formed? So you see here that the formation of the new image of God depends on the work of humanity. Many people have called it a co-creation. And then he adds, do not overvalue the consummate beauty of the world. By that he means, accord it its correct value. All things must be in balance in the world of nature and the cosmos. So give it its correct, well-balanced beauty. This, of course, is again the alchemical approach. After this experience with the dreams and his reflections around this, which we've just heard, he says, when I had the vision of the flood in October of the year 1913, it happened at a time that was significant for me as a man. At that time, in the 40th year of my life, I had achieved everything that I had wished for myself. I had achieved honour, power, wealth, knowledge, and every human happiness. Then my desire for the increase of these trappings ceased. The desire ebbed from me, and horror came over me. The vision of the flood seized me, and I felt the spirit of the depths. But I did not understand him, yet he drove me on with unbearable longing. And I said, my soul, where are you? Do you hear me? I speak, I call you. Are you there? After long years of wandering, I have come to you again. Should I tell you everything I have seen, experienced, and drunk in? Or do you not want to hear about all the noise of life in the world? But one thing you must know. The one thing I have learned is that one must live this life. This life is the way, the long sought after way. All other ways are false paths. I found the right way. It led me to you, my soul. I return tempered and purified. What words should I use to tell you on what twisted paths the good star guided me towards you? Jung has to drink himself that taste of blood that he described, mixed with the sweet and delectable wine from the frozen grapes. The remedy that he proposes to the waiting farm, his cultural contribution, is first and foremost the remedy that he must drink himself. In this we find a relationship, because of the sweet wine, to a deeper meaning of the symbolism of the Mass. This remedy is thus the initiation that the spirit of the depths forces him to undergo, which at that time he accepts, but which distresses him enormously. He says, the spirit of the depths forced me to say this, and at the same time to undergo it myself. I still laboured misguidedly under the spirit of this time. I thought and spoke much of the soul. I knew many learned words from her. I had judged her and turned her into a scientific object. I did not consider that my soul cannot be the object of my judgment, my knowledge, much more. are my judgment and knowledge the objects of my soul. Therefore, the spirit of the depths forced me to speak to my soul, to call upon her as a living and self-existing being. But firstly, as Jung describes, he had to become aware that he had actually lost his soul. When Jung says that he made the soul a scientific object, he had seen her through the materialistic lens of the conditioning of the spirit of this time. That is, his knowledge, his researchers came first, his researchers. So we could say that the atrophy that Rilke speaks of dominates him. He thinks of his scientific research, what he could do, how he could come up with an idea of what the soul is, but all that needed reversing. What was his soul seeing in him? Jung now goes through his conflicts as he establishes a connection with the soul that does not depend on his research and those bits of ideas and experiences that gave him his knowledge, that gave him the illusion that he knows his self. He had to reach a stage of humility. He had to realize that his soul guides him, and so leave the dead system of how the spirit of this time influenced him. He has to dispense with illusions of nearness. He has to experience how far away is his soul and how difficult it is to find her, to ask her to come closer. His action is to turn away from outer things so that his energy is fueled towards the inner search. He did at this time lead quite a hermetic life, saw very few people. And he says, he whose desire turns away from outer things reaches the place of the soul. If he does not find the soul, the horror of emptiness will overcome him, and fear will drive him with a whip, lashing time and time again in a desperate endeavour and a blind desire for the hollow things of this world. So, really, in the concrete sense of the word, we cannot turn away from outer things. We must earn our living, buy our food, live in a house. Jung speaks here symbolically of the direction of the flow of our psychic energy. What does it choose to flow towards? When we direct our energy towards the core of the depths, it takes us in hand. It is an important event then to experience the horror of emptiness of the time spirit. It forces a turn towards the spiritual reality. Similarly, fear can also be used. It's also important in these words of Jung. It reminds us of what to go towards and what is a priority for our energies. The whip lashes us if we deviate and go towards hollowness. For it is difficult for the soul to rest in the time spirit. It's very difficult because she belongs to the eternal. Prioritizing one's energy through listening to the spirit of the depths brings up a new level of consciousness through inner work. This includes work with dreams. Jung says, dreams are the guiding words of the soul. Why should I henceforth not love my dreams and not make their riddling images into objects of my daily consideration. You think that the dream is foolish and ungainly, but what is beautiful? What is ungainly? What is clever? What is foolish? The spirit of wisdom is enlightened, but the spirit of the dead, the opposite of God ends. So it was through the dream that you will found the proof of existence of the spirit of the dead. His dreams of the coming of World War I that was wider than personal life, and in 1912 he wrote about the scholarliness which he challenged. Scholarliness alone is not enough. There is knowledge of the heart that gives secret insights. The knowledge of the heart is in no book and not to be found in the mouth of any teacher. Scholarliness belongs to the spirit of the times. We started a little late, but I'm going to finish. I can't get the, I want to get to here.
Just the mouse and you click over here.
Oh, yeah.
And careful because this camera is filming you. And it will take the file so you don't see it.
So in joining the spirit of the depths with the spirit of this time, we see the spirit of the depths on the right, breathing unconscious energy onto the face of Jung's soul. This is by not Jung's soul, but the soul. This is a Swiss painter called Peter Bierkeuser, who's done many marvelous paintings. And this is Jung Rembrandt painting, showing him in pure humility in front of the power of the psychic. You see the little figure, that's Jung. And we have to miss quite a lot out, but this then is the spirit of the depths presiding over the earth. And to finish, I would say that there are many great men and women who are following a path of the evolution and development of the spirit of the depths. And this shows that it doesn't matter that they are well-known, written books. What matters is that their spirit enters into the world. And of course, what is hidden often has a greater influence. So each one's personal work is a little drop. So the myths of the perfected beings of great power and invisible to us are examples of this. They're in the top part of the picture. This is the above and below, the spirit of the depth and the spirit of the times. Thank you very much, everyone.